everyone, and welcome back to DevShow. My name is Sherry Liz, and I'm your host today, together with a good colleague of mine, Rasmus Jack. Hi, Rasmus, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. I just needed to put myself in the center of the video here. So yeah, I'm good. Thanks. Living still the lockdown live here in Denmark, but the weather is good and the sun is shining. So why not be happy about that? How are you?
I'm fine, but the sun is, it is shining, but not from this side, from the other side. That's also good. So, great. I assume we are back again with an awesome agenda, which Rasmus is going to talk about it in a bit. But before that, I want to mention you again that you all can ask your question from our speakers by typing in the chat. Doesn't matter from where you are watching us. But I really want to emphasize that please familiarize yourself with our code of conduct, which Rasmus just highlighted it here. But in a short, we really want you to be mindful and respectful of each other. And I also want to mention that we are enforcing our code of conduct if it's needed, which I really hope we will never ever need to do that. And during the show, we are also going to show you the link to our feedback form and also the link to get your Azure Heroes. We're going to talk about both at the end, but I just wanted to mention we are going to post that, yes. In the chat, you can claim your Azure Heroes or give us a feedback. So, Rasmus, everybody is waiting for hearing about our today's show. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that?
Drum roll. So yeah, as you have seen in the title, then we're gonna learn today how a big retailer has built an enterprise-ready Kubernetes platform. So I'm also looking very much forward to this because I'm also working with big customers in Denmark. So we're gonna see how they actually built an internal Kubernetes platform that is hosting now successfully 200 microservices in production. So that's a huge one, and I really look forward to meet the speakers of today. And also, as Sherry said, remember to ask your questions. Actually, unlike the other episodes, we're gonna have a short question and answer session in the middle of the section as well. So if you have a question, put them in the chat.
Yes, please do that. I guess we can bring our speakers on.
Yeah, let's welcome
them. Yes. So, hi, Frederick, and hi, Henry. Welcome.
Hi,
guys.
Hello.
Welcome to Dev Show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I also want to mention that we were supposed to have Gustav with us, but unfortunately he is sick. He couldn't join us today. So we are going to have him back again. Gustav, if you're watching us, you need to get
Hi, Gustav. Get well soon.
Yeah, but take care today, but another day you can join us. Okay, so Henry, I know that you recently joined Microsoft. First of all, welcome to Microsoft, and you're working as principal cloud architect. So maybe you can tell us that what exactly you do at Microsoft.
So yeah, I joined just last week. So I really mostly just reading the code of conduct. But to be honest, it's a very exciting and interesting task that I've been given. I will be working specifically with the local data centers in Norway, make sure that customers are able to use them correctly, make sure that we have enough capacity and all that good stuff.
Oh, great. And I know that you and I we have one thing in common, which we both we traveled to Iran. Actually, I was born and grew up there. So I guess you mentioned that you had hiking on a mountain that I could see the top of it from my bedroom in Tehran. So maybe we can talk about that. How was that experience?
Yeah, no, my family is a little bit nuts when it comes to traveling. So my parents, they were part of a group that is doing lots of mountain climbing. And then they had a seat free in a group of, we were 14, 15 people going to Iran. And that was, I figured, a once in a lifetime chance to see a completely different culture. So of course I had to take it.
Oh, that's great. I guess one day you should show me the pictures that you got from demo and mounting. So
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So good to have you here, Henry. And also, huge welcome to you, Frederick. It's a pleasure to have you on Dev Show. And you are a technical expert and consultant at Arum. What do you do there?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to help customers a little bit on the architecture, and for the last couple of years, there's been working a lot with Kubernetes.
Yeah, that's amazing. So we really look forward to pick your brain in this session, and also for you to share your experience. Just before we went live, we had a little bit of fun in terms of talking about cats and dogs. So are you a cat or a dog person? We need to know that.
Oh, that's a really complicated question. That's a deep one. I babysit a small cat sometimes, so I guess I have to. Yeah, I'm leaning a little bit towards cat, I guess.
Okay, that's amazing to know. Thanks, Frederick. So, shouldn't we let Frederick and Henry loose into this amazing topic and stay in the background?
I have actually one thing for Frederick, because I heard that it's not about cat and dog. No worries. So we heard that actually you do a lot of you work a lot with of course Kubernetes and open source, and you even contribute in open source. As a thank you for your contributions, we also want to, from Rasmus and I, we want to give you one of this Azure Heroes badger, which
Thank you.
For the special one, not only the plushie, you will get one, but you will get an actual badge as an open sourcer for Azure Heroes. So we're going to send an email later on to you. So, and thanks for all the cool, good stuff that you do for the community.
Thanks.
So I would say that the stage is yours. Henry, I'm going to share your screen, and Rasmus and I, we go on backstage.
Cool. Thank you, Sherry. Yes, so the retailer in question that we've been working with for several years now with Frederick is Elkjøp. And Elkjøp is the clear market leader in the Nordics, so North Europe. Over 400 stores. Most of them are like the really big box stores. And we sell a lot of electronics. Quite a traditional retailer, but 4 or 5 years ago, there was a start to use a lot of APIs to enhance business value and add like new functionality, because there was a bunch of different systems that needed to share the same functionality. And of course, microservices is perfect for that. So a couple of years ago, I started 2.5 years ago, in fact, I started working for Elkjøp, and I got the responsibility for this environment. It was a ready microservice architecture built together with, in fact, lots of architects supporting from Microsoft side. If you look at the details, you can see that there's API management, there's service bus, and there's Azure App Services in the middle, and Cosmos DBs separating them. So this is a microservices architecture that is doing, that is kind of using the CQRS pattern, so command, query, responsibility, segregation. We have long names in IT, and they're often a little bit annoying to remember. But it was a really solid platform. So for every microservice, we created a new Azure web app. And everything was automated in Azure DevOps. So a really smooth and scalable functionality. But just as I came in the door, we started a huge program to upgrade a lot of environments at Elkjøp. The one that customers will see the most is the one to the left that's called Blueberry, and that's actually being rolled out in stores right now. It's every store in Denmark is already using Blueberry. So if you guys, Sherry and Rasmus, are going to Giganten store, you will be paying and working with a salesperson who's using Blueberry. About half of Sweden is using Blueberry, and we're moving ahead, and by the end of this year, all the stores will be using Blueberry. All the other environments are also built in a similar pattern, but basically the Blueberry environment is a small application that is doing all the business logic in microservices. So obviously that means that the microservices are suddenly very much in the center. So if the old microservices, they had different integrations, they were doing payments, giving out product information and what have you, Blueberry suddenly is calling 20 different microservices, and they in turn call others. And that of course means that if these microservices stop, then all sales at Elkjøp also stops. So given the challenge, people showed me these requirements and then told me to make sure that this works. So actually I was then talking with Gustav, who unfortunately is not with us today. I met him at a Microsoft conference. He was presenting about Kubernetes. And I went up to him and challenged him, asked, like, I have hundreds of microservices. I need to host them better. What should I do? And we worked together, and he, in fact, recommended me to Fredrik then. So Fredrik and I, we had a talk, and he was, in fact, available. So together we sat down and started to design some microservices. And in fact, this is more about the infrastructure. So the microservices are looking exactly the same, but we needed to improve the whole environment. So microservices in center, that means that we need better scaling. Having hundreds of app services and then having to go and scale them one by one is really challenging. You have to understand the environment, you have to go in here and there, and it costs a lot of money. And developer experience gets a little bit challenging. And like I said, operational experience, not good. So we started looking into, okay, how should a Kubernetes environment look like if we wanted to replace it? We wanted, obviously, these non-functional requirements. We want more flexibility, but we still have lots of business standards and requirements for identity, for all kinds of security environments, and so on. And of course, if this system goes down, we need to get up really quickly. And the old environment, while very resilient to one service going down, but if we needed to redeploy lots of services, we actually had to run all our pipelines again. And that would have been a long process and not acceptable in a business continuity situation. And one of the coolest things, of course, because retail is moving on very, very, very thin margins, is that we also got much better cost control. So during this project, while we were working for about a year, I might add, the app service usage went up all the time. We had 200 app services by the time we were launching the Kubernetes environment, and they were costing us almost 4 million Norwegian crowns. Now the new Kubernetes environment that has all the systems running is costing around 1 million, and that's with all those systems in place. And we can even tune the prices down a little bit further if that's required. So yeah, that was kind of a good way of getting started. And of course, this is a process that took us some time, took us lots of learning. So we're going to share some of those learnings a little bit later. But the new environment that we built looked a little bit like this. Lots of Azure services still. We have the Azure DevOps systems. We have you still are using API management, still are using Azure Service Bus. But then inside the cluster, we had to pick and choose different components that would then fulfill the requirements we have. Because starting a Kubernetes environment in a modern public cloud is really easy. You click, 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 and you have a Kubernetes cluster. You can deploy your applications. But what you lack then is a lot of different non-functional requirements. You don't get monitoring. You get a little bit, but not to the level that we need. You don't get all the security you might imagine that you need. And things like this. So then what we did was that we started picking different open source components, which are fitting really well into Kubernetes. So we used Traffic for ingress controller. That's like a load balancer for Kubernetes. And then Linkerd is a service mesh. And service mesh is, to make it really simple, it's every application gets a proxy. And the proxy is then protecting the workload by encrypting the traffic, making sure that you're only allowed to talk to whatever other service that you're allowed to. And then also it gives a lot of observability, which you will see in our demo later. We also added a lot of different monitoring. We are scraping metrics using Prometheus. We're promoting it with Grafana. Again, I'm going to be showing a little bit about that later. And yeah, we're going to be showing you a couple of tricks that we really think are important when you are doing something on an enterprise scale. So what makes it really enterprise ready is that it fulfills the non-functional requirements of the business, of course. So there's lots of them. I'm not going to go into the boring details. But what we needed especially was great observability, great monitoring, and great operations. We also need to protect the environment from not just attackers, but also its users, making sure that they can't make mistakes that takes down the whole environment. And we also need to enforce standards, and those are some of what we're going to be talking about. And there's a couple of links here that there's a blog post and a Microsoft customer story where we shared more details, and just have a look at those and also ask questions afterwards. Now I think we can switch the screen to Fredrik's, because Fredrik, as the technical expert, will have a demo for us, and we're going to demonstrate something that is called source network address translation port exhaustion. So again, long and complicated words, but basically this was one of those big not flaws, but sensitive things that a Kubernetes environment has. So a Kubernetes environment will protect you and the workload really well, but network-wise, you can sometimes run into trouble. So Fredrik, let's talk about SNAT exhaustion, and then I'll tell you afterwards about how this happened while we were working.
Yeah, thank you, Andre. So I created a project here on GitHub where I tried to make a small demo of how we can run into this source mapping exhaustion problem and how we did run into it at Elkjøp as well. So I'll start just a little bit on this setup and what kind of metrics we're getting out of Linkerd, for example. So the setup of the demo is super simple. I try to make it as simple as possible. You have basically a number of consumers making HTTP requests. Those are hitting the load balancer that you get in AKS when you're starting it, and you're exposing an application inside of Kubernetes with the service of type load balancer. So that's being fronted by the load balancer, And that application, again, is doing a request outbound. It could be to anywhere, but in our case, just to an Azure function. But again, could be as long as there's something outside of the cluster. And what Kubernetes is doing here is to source network address translate the IP address. And the problem you can run into here is that if you're not reusing the sockets correctly, it takes a little bit of time before the ports become available. So if you have a lot of traffic, you can basically run out of ports. And then you will get some cryptic message a little bit depending on what kind of framework you're using. But in our case, we use the .NET framework, so then you get something like the underlying network closed the connection before it could have established on the TLS handshake, because that's basically the first HTTP request that's happening when you're making that outbound request. So super simple. We have two endpoints that we're going to be calling on that application. One of those endpoints is having a little bit naive approach, where it's creating new sockets for each of the requests, whereas the other one is reusing it. But also, Henry mentioned, to get that visibility, we had Linked installed as well. Henry alluded to the fact that Linked injects a small proxy that gives us those metrics. So I'll be showing off that a little bit as well. So Linked ships with a CLI tool that I've started here, and it also gives you some dashboards that you can look at, and also get an in-memory Prometheus server that you can get the really valuable insights in. So that's what we have showing up here. We see we have one application, we can receive traffic, and you're also showing up the in-memory Grafana here. Right now we have no traffic at all. Then we need some kind of tooling to simulate the traffic, and you can use a lot of different tools for that. We at Elkjøp decided to use K6. It's a tool where you can create some JavaScript files to simulate traffic. It's quite easy to get started on a local machine, and with just a parameter on the command line, you can upload it here like I've done to simulate a lot of different users. So these are two tests that are going to run for 50 seconds and 10 virtual users here. For the outbound request, we'll be looking at the metrics for that load balancer, which is doing the netting, which should be able to see requests coming in on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side here you will see the ports used here. Everything here is open source, nothing special. This is a ASP.NET Core application. You have two endpoints, and I guess you can guess which one is correct and which one is wrong by the naming here. So here you have the kind of naive way of doing it. We're creating a new HTTP client, which is setting up a new socket. Socket consists of a port, amongst others. And then we're just throwing away. But since it takes a little bit of time for the ports to be available again, you can run into the port extortion in high traffic. The correct way of doing it, or one way of doing it, where you don't run into this issue, is to use the HTTP client factory. This is specific for ASP.NET Core, but there are other tricks that does the same in other frameworks as well. This is basically where it makes sure that you're reusing the sockets, you're getting a new HTTP client, but making sure to recycle the ports and sockets underneath. So let's start off and see what happens if we have one that is not calling the endpoint, that is not reusing those sockets. Getting some cool graphics here. I'm just running for 50 seconds. And here we see the metrics going through the proxy in Linkerd. You can see the latency, P99 and P50, for example. And we can also get a Grafana dashboard where you see the traffic coming in here. And we'll take a notice of the request rate and also the latency here. So this is the point where it's setting up a new sockets feature every time. If we were to call other applications here inside of Kubernetes, then you can also take a look at outbound TCP metrics as well. It's not showing up here because it's going outside of the cluster in this scenario. So there's a little bit delay on these metrics. Yeah, so this is specific, obviously, for this tool, but here you can set up checks and thresholds in KSX, so you can run these tests kind of continuously and have it fail if the response rate goes down, for example.
Yeah, and this load testing tool K6 is actually one of the best ones that we found. We did a little bit of digging. And it's really flexible. This just like Fredrik said, write a little bit of JavaScript, and you can make it work. But this is all, and this can we see this in the Linkerd ports used also?
No, for the outbound here, I think we need to use this one here.
Yeah, this one is also a dashboard that actually didn't exist when we were working. Some used SNAT ports metric didn't exist when we ran into trouble with using SNAT ports. So it was actually a little bit of a detective work to figure it out. But after some stern feedback to Microsoft, we got this in place. But here you can see that the amount of ports is going up, and that's not a healthy sign for good code.
So there's a little bit delay on this one, so we can take maybe a look at the code for the SNAT demo here. So again, super simple, bare minimum demo, but there's an extension method that you can spin up this HTTP client. But so you're getting a new, fresh version of the client, but again, it's reusing the sockets underneath it. And so if the endpoint closes the connection, which it does eventually, the HTTP client factory will pick that up and create a new connection and recycle the ports and the sockets. So ideally, you want to create a socket for each of the endpoints. So for example, one for an API and reuse that for all of the requests to that API. Yeah, so here you see it request going down, but the ports went really up. And now we just ran it for a very few seconds. But if this goes up, it will soon then take up all the ports.
Yeah, and that's where the error message gets really strange from the application perspective, and from a cluster perspective, it looks like everything's running fine. You're getting low CPU usage, not much memory usage. The application seems to be running, but outbound calls are stopping. But in fact, it even might look in different applications as if the API that you're calling is failing.
Yeah, and we ran into the issue where you will not see the request hitting the API that you're trying to reach at least even. So when we looked at that system, we couldn't see any errors because the request wasn't receiving there at all.
Yeah. And we were running load tests just before launching in Denmark, actually, from the point of sale system, which is also hosted in Kubernetes. And we figured this is going to be fine. We have plenty of capacity. We've tested it before. It's a lightweight product, but then things just stopped working. And that left us scratching in our heads for a while. And also it's one of those errors that we in fact started to doubt that are we actually any good at this since it's going like this. But then Gustav was helping us to identify what the actual issue was, and what you can do then is to add more IPs to the outbound load balancer in Kubernetes, and then you will get more SNAT ports available. That helped us for the launch that we were going through, and then of course later we went back and improved on the network code so that it would be reusing the connections. But this is actually also something that is important to monitor in an existing cluster, that if you are deploying a new microservice and it starts to use lots of ports, it might look like your service is working really well. And then after a while, when you get more traffic or more outbound calls, some of them a certain percentage of them will start to fail, not all of them. And then you will be stuck in not knowing what is actually happening. But Fredrik, maybe you can show how to identify this then.
Yeah, so basically if you rerun the tests again here, but this time it's calling the other one, you will clearly see in these metrics that the ports are not increasing, whereas the requests are increasing. Another thing that you will see is that the latency will be much better, because you don't need to do that initial TLS handshake where you're setting up that symmetric key and setting up the encryption, because that will already be done. The sockets is already up and running. And if you have other applications, like I mentioned previously, then you would also see it here in the outbound TCP metrics as well. So you can quite easily set up metrics from those boxes in Linkerd on how many TCP connections that are setting up.
Yeah, that's what we have as a quality metric then to follow that amount of ports that are being used. And if an application looks like it's using an unnatural amount of ports, then it needs to be fixed sooner or later, even though we in production clusters add lots of IPs so that this shouldn't be caught. But then we have alerts and monitoring to make sure that we can catch those kinds of systems.
So it was running. And here you see it, the requests going up, but the used ports are staying the same. So Linkerd has been really good for us to troubleshoot communication inside of the cluster, where you can get those kind of metrics basically for free by just having Linkerd inject those proxies into the applications.
Yeah, and that's actually another of the big benefits is that with a tool like Linkerd, you end up, you remove all this discussion when developers blame the network or the infrastructure, and the platform team is saying like, no, it's your code. Like with this, you have actual facts that you can work around, and that of course enables a more healthy fact-based discussion around a outage or hopefully not an outage, but at least some issues with the code. Fredrik, I think that's as much as we can show about the SNATs. Rasmus, maybe you have some questions from the audience.
Yeah, so So right now we don't have a whole lot of questions from the audience. I actually just wrote out to everyone if there's anybody who has experience with monitoring Kubernetes with solutions like this or other types of solutions. So maybe we will get some inputs on that, and also to all the viewers, you can also have dialogues between you. But if you have any questions to what Frederick and Henry just showed, please put them into the chat, and we can take it afterwards. So right now it's a carry on. You have more demos to show, I know. So I'm gonna jump in the background again.
Yep. So thank you, Rasmus. So the other demo we wanted to show, again, remember we are building an enterprise platform. The second demo that we want to show is a little bit simpler, but and someone might think that it's more boring, but it's actually just as important. So that's about policies. And when you have a lot of users of the same Kubernetes cluster, you do need some policies that make sure that everyone does the correct thing, such as makes sure that there's resource limits on any deployment that they're doing, or maybe you have a request, you want to have priorities on different workloads so that the most important ones are always running. And that's what we're going to show here. And one point to make here, which is cool, when Microsoft combines and works together with open source, you kind of get a synergistic effect. So the same policy language that we're using in this demo is also used can be used from Azure Policy, which means that you can actually do like tenant-wide Kubernetes policies if you want to. In our case, we are deploying the policies just per cluster and part of the automated process. But you could also have it on a tenant level if you allow teams to have their own Kubernetes clusters. So Frederick, take it away.
Yeah, so something that Henry and I strived for was to try to move as much as possible to as code. So obviously you want to have infrastructure as code, but as we saw in the K6 tool, you can have load testing as code, check that into repository, pull request, all that good stuff. And the same thing you can do with policies to a large extent. So instead of having these wiki pages, you need to remember this and that, you can enforce this as part of the deployment to Kubernetes cluster. So I've tried to explain that a little bit on a super high level, how that's working. But basically, when you're interacting with the API server in Kubernetes, which are the one that you're mainly interacting with, and all the other components for that matter, you're making a request to it. So you're taking a YAML file. Let's say you want to deploy a deployment. You're sending that in through Kubernetes, the CLI tool, kubectl. You could also do HTTP requests manually, but it's just more convenient with the CLI tool. And then it goes through a series of steps in the API server before it is persisting to the etcd, and then all the other controllers in Kubernetes are picking those up and making it happen. The first step, obviously, is the authentication authorization. Here, we are relying on the OpenID Connect integration, but you have basic auth if you want to do that, and you also have certificates if you want to use that, create a certificate for specific users. So the OpenID Connect is quite convenient, especially in AKS here, because you can integrate that with Azure AD and control what different AD groups can do and not do. And then you have these submission controllers, and this is quite cool concept in the API server, because you can augment this. You can extend them and do your kind of changes to it. The first one is the mutating one. So basically, everything that can take in some JSON representing the Kubernetes object that you want to change or create, you can do some manipulations on that, add labels, or whatever the organization want to have as a policy. and send it back. Obviously, there's a schema validation to see if it's still a valid Kubernetes object. And then it goes into the validation mission controller, and this is where we want to demo a little bit, because this is almost exactly the same as mutating, but this time it's just sending it to an application that has been registering itself as a validation mission webhook, and which is then responding yes or no. And if it responds yes, it's according to the policies, it's been persisted, and you're good to go. To do those registrations and to create those policies, there's a project called the Open Policy Agent. It's not something that you have to use with. That is only applicable to Kubernetes. You can use that tool for other technology as well. But here we're looking at the Kubernetes part. So from a high level here, super simple. Sending in JSON in our case, that would be Kubernetes objects. It's taking in some data if you want to have that, and then you have the policies written in a query language called Rego, which is quite powerful and good language, which we'll take a look at, and response yes or no, or true or false. To be able to deploy this Open Policy Agent and change it and manage it, there's another project called Gatekeeper, which is doing exactly that. And I've already done these steps. So I already installed it. And I also installed a small UI here. So we can start that. So just port forwarding to that UI here. And this is where you can use actual policies instead, for example, like in the Henry mentioned. I've also checked out the code, so we can take a look at how you would create two policies, for example, and then have a demo application that are breaking those policies, and we'll see the result on that one as well.
Yeah. Can you zoom in a little bit, Fredrik?
Yeah. Is that better?
Yes, good.
So in this demo, we have two templates. And this is I think it's a really cool part of the the Gatekeeper and Open Policy Agent, because those templates can be written in a generic way so that there are lots of them online. This one is making sure that we have some priority classes set, and it's actually taking in as a parameter the different priority classes. So on the right-hand side, we see an instance of that policy. This is called priority class must be set, where we are providing the three different priority classes that you'll be able to must have. And here you see the Rego, which are then trying to fulfill by looking at the JSON object these rules, and if it matches one of those, in this case, one of those violations, then it's not according to policy. Otherwise, it is. So what we can do, we can apply the templates. And those will be popping up here. This is just a UI tool for showing it. Here you see the parameters and the Rego definition. And then we go ahead, apply the instances of those. And it's automatically being picked up here as well. So you can run it in different modes. In this mode is that we are denying, we're stopping deployments that are not according to this one, but we're not stopping the ones that are already running. So you can specify a little bit how you want to do that. So these policies are making sure that we have the requested limits set, and also that we have some priority classes. So let's take a look at a demo application that doesn't have any of those, just violating everything basically. And here you see the error message coming out. So it's denied because you're missing the memory limits, CPU limits, requests. And also it's denied because we're missing the priority class. So this is a good way to show and enforce those policies at least. And obviously you can have policies. So for example, on deployment, you need to have a label specifying maybe the team or the tech lead, or yeah, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and this is exactly the kind of tooling that you need if you want to have a enterprise environment that is also has the long-term, the longevity to be able to be used, because otherwise you're going to have a whole mess of different deployments, different systems, and so on.
And it's also easy to add after the fact also. So then you would have a list in the UI that showed you with the ones that are in violation, and on the next deployment of those it would be stopped. And then you can basically go to different teams and say, please update your applications accordingly.
Yes. And that's what we wanted to show. I think we actually held exactly on time. So I hope that Sherry and Rasmus are happy.
More importantly, I think the audience is happy. So we are definitely happy. Very interesting story. And yeah, I mean, I'm working with a big customer in Denmark, and we are also talking Kubernetes and how to kind of scale it to a customer or a company sized as Elkjøp as well. So really good insights.
Yeah, I remember that, Henry, we discussed last time about the kind of that your new architecture, what you built there, it actually helped you a lot the Black Friday. Maybe you can tell the audiences a little bit about that.
Yeah, now the challenge previously during Black Fridays was, like I mentioned, that we had app services and we had to go in and specifically scale all of them so that they are at the correct size. Of course, that's you can just scale high, but you still have to monitor and follow them, and that's not so easy to do. This year, because of COVID-19 and safety of customers and employees, we even stretched the Black Friday to a really long time. It was actually, I think it was 10 or 11 days, something like that. And with a small operations team, that can be really tough, especially if you suddenly have to fix some issues and you burn out your team at the first days of Black Week. But what's funny is that we actually just scaled up the environments ahead of time, and then we have a little bit of auto scaling, lots more coming, and then we were actually bored. Like we had a couple of issues, but none of them related to Kubernetes. So we were mostly sitting around, and that's a bizarre feeling that you're sitting around at your home office and you're watching billions of sales go by, and there's no problems, and things are just moving smoothly. So that was a strange but fun time, and I like working with retail is really exciting, partly because of these big environments, and that a very big percentage of sales is during these few days.
Yeah, that is very true. I guess
so we have one question here from Peter. So he said maybe he missed it, but but how the system was before and what your biggest concern was going to was.
So that's a really good question, because of course Kubernetes is complicated, and we knew that we have to change, and we looked a little bit about how we could automate or use web apps in a better way. But ultimately, that felt like almost as much work as just going fresh with Kubernetes. And we got lots of extra functionality with Kubernetes. But the worry really was the complexity, and will developers like it? And will it become a problem? But what we did was that we had this approach with Fredrik, that we wanted to replicate the app service, replicate and improve on the app service experience. And we wanted to solve real problems, so we didn't just add lots of cool cloud native compute foundation projects. We chose them for a reason, and then we time boxed it. So I would give Fredrik 1 week to learn and make sure that Linkerd works, and if it doesn't, then we'll go back and see, do we actually need it, or do we use another service mesh, for instance. So by doing that, we kind of avoided some of this. Then towards the middle of the project, we started involving developers, and we actually got really good buy-in from the developers. They actually liked it much more than we expected. So they saw their code much better, like they had better observability. So we actually found problems that would have turned into serious problems in the future just when we moved to Kubernetes. And that really made us feel confident that when we go live, we will not have problems. This SNAT problem was one that we did have. And there's, of course, always some kind of old code that is doing things in a way that is depending on the infrastructure that we had to catch and fix. But all in all, a really good experience and a successful project.
That sounds good. I guess we have actually Pavel as well, and that I assume, I guess maybe Pavel, you should help me. So I assume that this is kind of that maybe you're concerned about the starting it up. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Fredrik, Henry mentioned that he gave you a week to learn about these different topics. So maybe I can share us that, how was that experience? Do we have enough of resources for you to learn? I mean, as a person that wants to just kick start it, how's the experience?
I thought the experience was really good. Something that you see throughout the CNCF project that we tried to standardize a little bit on was that the community is really friendly and very open to help other people. And that's something that we saw, for example, the Linkerd community was really, really good. And also when we had a little bit questions on running Linkerd in HA and something, how we should use customized priority classes, some finer details, the community was responding just basically a couple of hours, depending on the day. So that was really good. And I think also the CNCF is making the bar pretty high before the projects are becoming a full member. And some of the checkmarks there have, in my opinion, has to be the documentation and stuff, but it's also really good. Yeah.
That is good to hear.
And also, it was also good at the kind of a little bit challenging from Henry back and forth also to see what kind of projects that you would like to introduce, because it's there's a lot of cool technology, but we definitely have to try to solve some problems as well.
That's great input as well. So we have one more. We actually have a couple of more questions. So, but this is more like a firewall question. So, do you use any firewall, Azure firewall, to control the incoming and outgoing traffic here?
That's a good question, and that's a common pattern, of course. And a good pattern is to filter outbound traffic if you are worried that you have workloads that might do bad things. And of course, you have the inbound stuff. But what we did was that API management was the security boundary, and we don't have all our consumers are actually required to authenticate. So they either authenticate with the key when they're connecting to an API in Azure API management, or they are logging in with Azure AD. And that means that we can, of course, not trust, but at least the traffic is pretty good. So we don't have to filter it with a firewall or something like that. That's a little bit, in this kind of new zero trust world, the firewall is a little bit heavy-handed, so to say, but it can stop some attacks and stuff like that. And outbound, you could, if you don't trust it, you should do filtering, but we chose to trust the developers for now, but that's also something that could be added easily afterwards.
Yeah, very good point.
We have also from Casper. So did you change wheels while driving, or was you in a special group where there was no day-to-day task?
That's a very good question. So I see that Casper knows how enterprises work. So I was actually super busy in a lot of things. So that's why it was really thankful to have Fredrik with me. He was dedicated 100% to this, which meant that I was working with him, of course, but he was doing a lot of the digging. Then he would tell me and show me, convince me, and then we would move on. So that was one of the parts. But then what we were also lucky enough was that we actually were able to build our own operations team at the same time. So we actually hired at the same time more operations people, because we knew that the Kubernetes environment will require more people. And they were part of the kind of building of the platform. So they learned as we went along. And now they own the platform. So even though we left Elkjøp, both me and Fredrik, the platform itself is in really good hands. So we have 4 people dedicated for this. So they will do 24/7 response for this environment.
Okay, great. Then we have one last question here from Peter, just to follow up. So I don't know if Fredrik or Henry, you want to take this, but did you experience any bottlenecks or pitfalls with the development path that you took? So microservices and Kubernetes.
That, of course, there's always some stops and friction, but in general, we got really good. Like, we involve the developers all the time, very actively. So any kind of friction from them, we got past. Technically, since app services, the ones that we use, are using Windows, and we're moving to Linux at the same time, that of course meant that we found new problems. But we created a process of how to upgrade an application, because we have a quite standardized way of creating microservices. So they all look quite similar. So once we standardized and made a good checklist of this is how you upgrade, and part of it was automated and part of it was manual, and then developers could just take one application at the time, go through dev, test, and then prod. And we also automated so that when they deployed it, the API management would then start moving traffic to that one. And if it was failing, we could have gone back to the web app, because the web app was left for a few weeks, so we could go back. So that was also a pretty good approach. But yeah, there's you can absolutely run into troubles. It is a little bit more complicated than app services. So do figure out if you actually need Kubernetes. Azure Web Apps or similar hosted PaaS services hold your hand a lot, and that's really useful. So our department would not have been where we are if we started by building Kubernetes. We would have spent all the money on that, and then we would never create business value.
Good point.
That's a very good point, yes.
We have no more questions in the chat here, so I guess, yeah, hang on. But just want to make sure that we say super thanks to Fredrik and Henry for the look under the hood in terms of what you have done with Elkjøp and Kubernetes here, and also answering all the questions. So, Sherry, you want to talk about the winter learning, even though the sun is shining?
It's cold. I mean, it's not too warm. I will keep issuing winter learner until the day that I feel warm, and maybe it become August. I don't know. Nobody knows. But yes, to get your winter learner, you can scan this QR code and then follow the instruction. And this is a part of our Azure Heroes program that we have, which is a token of appreciation from Microsoft to the developer community for learning and building on top of our technologies. And apart from this learner badge that we have other badges, for example, like the one that we issued for Frederick, which is open source. So you can go on this URL and then check out all the different badges that we have and nominate yourself or a community friend. If you see your colleague, your friends around that they are doing, cool stuff, you can nominate them and say thank you. Then you can send it from your side as well. And
as always, we want your feedback, and Henry and Frederick also want your feedback. So if you have any comments or ideas to the session today, we will share it afterwards with Frederick and Henry, because I'm sure that this is not the first time and not the last time that we have the pleasure of hearing the story about this. And also, for DevShow, we want to improve. We are building the agenda constantly, so give us your feedback in terms of what you want to hear. And also, if you want to be a speaker yourself, and I know Sherry is always picking one to get some swag if you fill out the form. So even more incentivized to go and fill it out.
Yeah, one of you who fill out the form is going to get the some swag box from and our next one. Sorry, we still don't have the announcement card.
So next week we will have a secret speaker, Abdel, going to talk about secure deployments to the cloud. So using Azure DevOps, a lot of you developers is using Azure DevOps, and we all want to deploy securely. So this is a good watch as well, and it's going to be next week at the same time as we normally.
Yeah, it's Abdel Rahman from Proactive. He's going to share his journey. And on Wednesday, if you want to build your robot, you can join this. You can join the Maker Show. It's going to be on Wednesday, 5 o'clock, our time CET. And yes, my favorite event of the year, I would say, apart from DevShow, of course. So then the thing is that you all have chance to use all of your technical skills to help solve some of these environmental issues that we have. The important part about this hackathon and what it makes it my favorite one and unique is that all the challenges that they are real life challenges that they come from non-profit organizations that they are actually tackling these issues. So what you need to do is that to go to the website and register and then talk about it with all of your friends. You can either come up with your team or build it on the fly on DevPost. And normally hackathons happening on 48 hours during the weekend, but we just said that that's not a good idea because the way that we are already stuck in the house, so we better to just span it through a week. So based on your time and availability, you can work on this project in a span of 1 week. So go ahead and register for this hackathon, and then we have also a cloud skills challenge. Connect to it. Since it is already too late, I'm not going to show the video. Rasmus, don't worry about it. But but yeah, we have a cloud skills challenge as well. Connect to it. I will share the link. This for the next one, which is in 2 weeks. It's going to be focused on Azure machine learning. So yeah, I hope to see you all there, and see you next week.
Thanks all for watching. Thanks Frederick and Henry again for joining Dev Show. See you next
Thank
week,
you.
all in the audience.
Bye
Have a
bye.
good evening. Bye bye.